Hola, bienvenido a la clase de español. Soy señor Chapman. ¡Vámonos! So welcome back to class. Bienvenido, guys. If you were not able to catch the live class, that means you're here with me right now watching the recording, so welcome. Today we're going to be talking about family names and also descriptive adjectives. A lot goes into a name. We have your first names. A lot of times in English, you have your middle names and you have your last names. But in Latin America, sometimes it gets a little bit more complicated. And then sometimes, depending on the country, there are two last names. Of the two last names, guys, sometimes there is what you call the paternal last name, and then there's what you call the maternal last name. The paternal last name is the last name given by your father's side of the family. The maternal last name is the last name given by your mother's last name. So now when you hear the question, ¿Cómo te llamas? What is your name? What do you call yourself? You're going to be looking at this in a little bit different light. In the Spanish-speaking world, it's common to have two last names, one paternal and one maternal. In some cases, the conjunctions de or y are used to connect the two. For example, the name Juan Martinez de Velasco, Martinez is the paternal username, el apellido paterno, and Velasco is the maternal surname, el apellido materno. De simply links the two. This convention of using two last names, doble apellido, is a European tradition. And then the Spaniards went ahead and brought this to the Americas, and it continues to be practiced in many countries, including Chile, Colombia, Mexico, Peru, and Venezuela. There are a lot of exceptions, guys. And then right now, I'll kind of go through some of the exceptions of some of the countries. For example, in the country of Argentina, it's customary that only the father's last name is used, el apellido del padre. When a woman marries in a country where two last names are used, legally she will retain, or in other words, she will keep her two maiden surnames. However, socially, she may take her husband's paternal surname in place of her inherited maternal surname. For example, Mercedes Barcha Pardo, widow of Colombian writer Gabriel Garcia Marquez, might use the names Mercedes Barcho or Barcha Garcia or Mercedes Barcha de Garcia. In social situations, although officially her name remains Mercedes Barcha Pardo, adopting a husband's last name for social purposes, though widespread, is only legally recognized in, guess what, two countries, Ecuador and Peru. Many times, moms or mothers won't break that tradition. So generally you will see the last name of the mom first and then the father. So guys, true or false? Just based on what we've said so far, in other words, true, we would say cierto, and false, we would say falso. So true or false? Number one, most Spanish-speaking people have three last names. True or false? If you would have said false, then you would be correct because most Spanish speakers have two last names as opposed to three. And then based on what we've talked about last name, true or false, Hispanic last names generally consist of the paternal last name followed by the maternal last name. Is that true or false? That would be false because the maternal last name comes first, the last name of the mother, and then the father's last name. Uh-oh, did I just say that? So it is the father's last name first, and then the mother's last name. If you caught that, good job. So true or false, guys, it is common to see de or y used in a Hispanic last name. That is true. It is very common to see either de or e used in the last name in conjunction, and that way it would help to tie those two last names together. So if you said true for that, great job. So true or false? Someone from Argentina would most likely have two last names. Is that true or false? That's false. In fact, if you're from Argentina, you're not going to have two last names. That's the exception. You're going to have one. So in a lot of different countries, depending on the region, there's going to be a lot of different ways of saying things. So if you're talking about friends, if you're talking about families, if you're talking about brothers and sisters, sometimes there's a different way of saying things. When we look here at the top of our page, it says, así se dice, we have familia y amigos. So family and friends. So depending on where you're at in the world, you may see something different. For example, el bisnieto is the great grandson. La bisnieta is the great granddaughter. Now, of course, if you're in Mexico or some other different countries, then that name's probably going to look a little bit different. So let's go ahead and check those out. If we were in Mexico, the name would look like El Chamaco or El Chalmaca. So depending if it's the great granddaughter or great grandchild, that would look like El Bisnieto. But when we look at El Chamaco, we're looking at in a friendship when we're talking about El Muchacho. So the boy or the girl, La Muchacha, okay? If we were in Venezuela, it would look like El Chamo. So if it's El Chamo, that's like saying, oh, the boy. If it's a girl in Venezuela, La Chama. If we looked at some place like Argentina, when we're talking about a boy, then we would say Pible. If it was a girl, La Pibla. All right, so these are just some differences that we'll see in different parts of the world depending on the name that we're using. So it really just depends on what the region that you're in. So what if I wanted to talk about my friend or my buddy? Well, let's go ahead and take a look. Generally speaking in Spanish, if we're talking about my friend, we're talking about my amigo, mi amigo. But if I was like, for example, in Honduras, I would say, oh, guess what? Guess what that would be? Mi alero. Yeah, if it was a female, mi alera. So that's someone that you're really close with, you're really great buddy. So here in the United States, you may hear amigo or amiga. If you're in Mexico, you may hear mi cuate. So it really depends on where you're at. Mi parcero, if you're in Colombia, you may hear that. So it really just depends on where you're at. What about godmother? So the name for godmother is madrina, la madrina. For godfather, el padrino. Okay. If we were talking about the great grandfather or great grandmother, just really depends on where you're at in the world. So right here, this is actually a name that I'm not used to hearing, and they are using tartabuelo or tartabuela. So that's used for a great grandfather or great grandmother. Okay, so like I said, there's a lot of different words that we can use for friends, families, and different other names that we could use depending on the region that you're in. What about household sizes? Yeah, sometimes those change depending on the country you're in. So let's look at some of the comparisons to look at household sizes of Hispanics or Latin Americans or Spanish speakers all over the world, and just kind of see how they compare with each other. So house sizes, when we look in Mexico, we're looking at average sizes of about 4 people. Colombia, about 3.9. Argentina, 3.6. Uruguay, 3. España, about almost 3, 2.9. And United States, we got about a little bit more than 2.5. So it just really depends on where you're at in the world. I'd like to go ahead and talk about one of the most famous families that are known in the world right now, and that's at least in the world of Latin America. So let's look at one of the royal families right now out of Spain. So Spain's most famous family is La Familia Royal or Real. So the royal family, the then Prince Juan Carlos de Borbón, he married Princesa Sofia of Greece, okay? So during that time, El Rey, or the king, Juan Carlos, and La Reina, the queen, Sofia, helped transition Spain to democracy after a 40-year dictatorship. So 40 years. So the royal family has a number of children, and let's go ahead and take a look at them, shall we? Okay, so we have the Prince Felipe, and then Felipe married Leticia Ortiz, and so she's a really famous journalist and TV presenter. They have two daughters, and so one was born in 2005, the other one was born in 2017, and then in 2014, Juan Carlos decided to abdicate the throne in favor of his son. So let's go ahead and look at some questions based on what we've read today and see what we have found out. So the first one, and this is a little bit of comprehension just to kind of see what you've learned today. So Spain's royals were responsible for guiding in what? So if we were going to look at that, they have guided in democracy. Don't forget, they had suffered a dictatorship that lasted for about 40 years. That's a long time. And in Spanish, what is the word godmother? Let's see if we can remember that. If you said la madrina, you would be correct. La madrina means godmother in Spanish. And then what about Uruguay's average house size? About how many members are in their family? If you said 3, then you would be correct. Their average house size in Uruguay is about 3 people, 3 personas. Okay, guys. So just looking back, today we talked about family names, we talked about friends, we talked about different names that you would hear in different regions. We talked about last names, we talked about double last names, and sometimes your last names have only include one depending on the region, and other times your last name may include 2 last names depending on where you're coming from. We also talked about family sizes, how many average people reside in each family. Then we talked about just some of the traditions and cultures and things that have been passed down and how names are different depending on where you're coming from. Next time that we meet, I want to talk about descriptive adjectives. So make sure that you really pay attention to the video. You can always pause it and go back and see if you can answer some of the questions in regards, because just because we talk about it now doesn't mean that it will be forgotten. We may go ahead and revisit this topic again for just a comprehensive exercise to see how much you remember. All right, so if you have any questions, please reach out to me by email. So just don't forget that I'm available anytime. Just notify me in advance. You can email me, catch me during CCL, or we can arrange another time to meet. Until then, guys, yo soy Señor Chapman. Adios.